The warrior ideal of the Plains people is an interesting way of life. The code, the ideal, the warrior ideal, is predicated on 4 principles. They are bravery, steadfastness, generosity, and truth. And Kiowa society, until recent times, lived by those rules. They make for an appropriate way of life. They serve humanity quite well. They serve the humanity of their time quite well. The warrior society has been diluted, has vanished in some ways, has been replaced by another society. Still native, of course, but a different set of rules, if you will. And I want to talk to you about a set of principles that are indeed native, but are more pervasive than were the rules of the warrior society. They express American culture as a whole, American native culture. So we're not talking about the Kiowas only, or the warrior people so much, as we were talking about all native peoples of the country. They are universal in the rules are universal, the code, the principles, I should say, are universal in their application. They are source, destiny, wonder, and imagination. Those are the principles by which the indigenous peoples of North America, as a whole, live their lives, even in our time. And so I want to impress them upon your knowledge and your memory. They were given to me in conversation with a 100-year-old woman, Kiowa woman I once met. And we had a wonderful time together. She could not speak English, and I could not speak Kiowa, but somehow we managed to converse with the help of my father's interpretation. I'll tell you more about her as we go. The first of these principles, source, is the most commonplace, and yet it is the most difficult to understand, I think. It is the source of being, actually. When I say source, I'm talking about the source of life itself, which dwells in each one of us. Each one of us. It is a thing that is forever, forever alive within us. It is our soul, our meaning, our how can I say more meaningfully? It is our deepest existence. We are all possessed of this source. It is the source of our lives, the source of our energy, the source of our knowledge, the source of our well-being. There are other names for it. Perhaps you could call it essence, or spirit, or energy, or center. It is all of these things, but it dwells within us, and each of us is in charge of it, as it were. We need to acknowledge that deepest part of our existence, our soul, and we must strive to save our souls. I think you cannot think of a more fundamental principle than that. It is the immortal self. It is incumbent upon each of us to know our deepest selves and to act upon that knowledge and to save our souls. An old man named Dragonfly acknowledged his soul in relation to the rising sun, and I'll tell you that story in a few minutes. The second principle is destiny, or if you want, purpose. Each of us has a purpose in life, and in order to be fully alive, we must fit that purpose, we must find that purpose, and we must serve it. Lord, make me an instrument of thy will, says Saint Francis. Make use of me. Do not let me be wasted. let me be fulfilled. Let me serve my purpose, and so celebrate my life. Our purpose is to run to the edge of the world and beyond, off into the darkness, free for all our fetters, sure for all our blindness, gaily in love for all the pressure on our hearts. That's St. Thomas Aquinas in a well-known and famous celebration of life. Several years ago I was in Alaska, and I went out to a native Alaskan village. I was teaching at the time at the University of Fairbanks. And I was invited out to a celebration in a remote village about maybe 70, 100 miles from Fairbanks. It was winter, and so I went out and met with the people there. They were having a festival. Each winter, at a certain time, the people gather together and they serve their elders. There were many old people in the village. They had to be fed because they could not feed themselves. And the winter is very harsh in that part of the world, as you can imagine. When I was in Fairbanks, the temperature got to 47 below zero Fahrenheit. So, you know, life is a problem there. Life has to be carefully managed and preserved. And of course, in the manner of the native peoples, the indigenous peoples, their elders are important to them and they save them. So there was a big hall in this village. And everybody gathered there, and people were roasting moose meat outside. You could smell the wonderful smoke and see the fires burning. And they brought the meat in and distributed it to the elders. And in the meantime, there was, you know, celebration of life. I met a boy there whose name was Paul, and he was retarded, Down syndrome, I think. But he was a very engaging young man, very friendly, and he had certain skills that were apparent. There were dances in the hall that night, and he was a principal dancer, wonderful dancer. There was a dance in which a row of men came in backwards through the door, and they were crouched low, and they danced backwards, and he was clearly the leader of that group. He could dance better than anyone else in the group. And I got to know him slightly and heard his story. But he wanted to go away to school along with his peers. But the holy man, the equivalent of the mayor of the village, said, "No, Paul, you can't go to school. You are not prepared to compete with children of your own age. You don't have the mind for it. Your destiny lies elsewhere." And so he said, I think you might carry water to the village, carry water to the elders. And that's what became of Paul. He became the water carrier of the village. And he worked very hard at it. He would go every day down to the river, break the ice, and bring buckets of water. And he did it all day long. But he did it so well that it was clearly his vocation. And he became known as the water carrier. And he was very pleased with that occupation because it fulfilled him. It gave him a purpose, and he was made useful. And that is one of the greatest things that can happen to us, to be made useful. So that's the principle, and that's the story of Paul. I think he's probably still carrying water, and he does it better than anyone else. The third principle is humility. Humility and what might be called wonder. Humility begets wonder and delight. And we must understand what humility means. It means that we accept who we are, that we accept who we are without pretense, apology, or regret. It means that we are honest with ourselves. This is the basic meaning, I think, of humility. Blessed is he who expects nothing, for he shall never be disappointed. It's sort of the basic root of the idea of humility. It means that we are honest with ourselves. We must accept what we are given and be grateful for it. This is the bone of humility. The great benefit of humility is wonder and delight. Each of us, I think, experiences moments of wonder in our lives. And sometimes we take them for granted, and sometimes we let them go by, which is a mistake, because they deserve to be acknowledged and examined and be meaningful for what they really are. They don't have to be big moments. Wonder comes in all sizes. I've known wonder in my life on many occasions, as I know you have. Once I was asked to participate in a film that was being made by some British people who had come here and they wanted to film on the Navajo reservation. So I went along with them, and we went to Canyon de Chelly, and we stayed at Chinle, and we did our filming in Canyon de Chelly, which is a wonderful place. As you know, another great feature in the landscape of the planet. And one day we knocked off, and we went back to our motel. And it was still fairly early. It was late in the afternoon, but there was still plenty of daylight left. And I happened to step outside. I wanted a breath of fresh air. And when I opened the door and stepped out, I was almost knocked off my feet by the sunset. Half the dome of the world was on fire. Half of it. Deep red, brilliant red and purple and orange. It was incredibly beautiful. And I thought to myself, this is a gift. I will never see this again, but I am privileged to see it once. I will not expect to see it again. But to see it once was fulfilling. It made me whole in a way that I can't forget. Another time on the Navajo, at Lukachukai. Lukachukai is a wonderful Navajo name, which means where the reeds bend eastward. I was at a curing ceremony in a hogan there, and the ceremony went into the night, and there was a medicine man, an earthen altar with crystals and spruce and all kinds of different medicinal things around it. And there was a woman in there who tended the fire, kept the embers bright, and he would go to the fire and bring a burning stick back, and he treated his patient with that kind of anointment of fire. And at a certain point, way into the ceremony, maybe 4 o'clock in the morning, he said, "Now we must go outside. I have to blow the whistle." He had an eagle bone whistle, and he said that he had to blow it in the 4 directions. And so we stepped out of the hogan into the Navajo night. And again, I was nearly knocked over by the stars. There was no light pollution at all. And the stars were brighter and more numerous than I've ever seen them. And it seemed that you could reach up and touch them. It was a sight that you can't forget if you see such a thing. So again, I was grateful for this moment of wonder. And I'll tell you a little story about another wonder that I have very much in my mind at this particular time of the year. My father, who was a full-blood Kiowa, grew up near Rainy Mountain. And there's a church at Rainy Mountain, a Christian church, a Baptist church, which was started, it's well over 100 years old now, and it's still there. And there were Christmas programs at the church when he was a little boy. And he was telling me this story, he remembered having gone out to Rainy Mountain, which was a journey of about 15 miles from his home, gone in a wagon with his mother and father and his siblings. And they went to the Christmas party. Well, there was a tree, and there were presents under the tree, and his name was on one or two of the presents. And every child was given a Christmas stocking. And in his stocking, there was an orange. He had never seen an orange before. And he said, when I held it in my hand, I felt the texture of it, I saw the color of it, and I could smell, the smell of an orange. He said, it filled me with wonder. And when I ate it, when I bit into it, there was this most wonderful juice, the most delicious liquid. And the meat was so succulent and sweet. So I was just in wonder of this object in my hands. Well, my father became a teacher, and as I've told you, he taught at Amos Pueblo for 25 years. So did my mother. And he put on a Christmas play every year at the school. He would go to Albuquerque and visit the produce places and bring back nuts and fruits and candies, and every child had wonderful presents. And every child had an orange. No child went without a Christmas orange. And I thought, yes, that's, I know about that. I was once in a store about this time of year, and I've forgotten the store, but in it was a tree, and there were decorations on the tree, of course. And I noticed an orange color to a number of the ornaments on the tree, and I went up to see because I was curious as to what they were. They were orange slices, real orange slices that had been dipped in something to give them a kind of glaze, and light passed through them and made a wonderful color. And I thought, maybe this is the oldest of all Christmas tree ornaments. And then I thought, maybe when you think of the story of the Christ child, the birth of the Christ child, and the three wise men who come with gifts, and they are gold and frankincense and myrrh, maybe the gold was an orange. And the Christ child, when he felt it, tasted it, was filled with the same wonder that had informed my father's first taste of an orange. So, I pass that story on to you, and I want you all to be sure that you have an orange at Christmas time. It's an old tradition. The fourth principle is imagination. And it is sometimes difficult to define the imagination, but you should imagine, we are who we imagine, we are what we imagine. The imagination is an energy and a force within us that cannot overestimate. It is there, and it is up to us to imagine our souls, to imagine our destiny, to imagine wonder and humiliation. And the greatest things, I think, in the world, the greatest things that can touch us where we live, are imagined. We find something that excites our imagination, and these are the high points of our life. I have imagined things, and so have you. And the matrix of the imagination is language. We take language for granted, but it informs almost everything we do. I once read, I think it was a writer named Peter Farr, who said that thought is talking to oneself. And if you think about that and believe it, as I do, it means that we cannot think really without language. We think in language. Language is the thing that brings all of these principles together and makes them real for us. And so cannot overestimate the power of language. And there are language barriers. There are so many languages in the world, and they sometimes come up against each other. And the points of contact are very difficult sometimes. I'll tell you a story about that. Once upon a time, I was on Greenland, and I happened to take a boat, a small boat like a tugboat, up the northwest coast of Greenland. Am I right about northwest? Anyway, along the coast of Greenland to a village which is the farthest north village on the planet. It's called Sihanouk, small village, and on our way we passed icebergs, and they were huge, as huge as skyscrapers, and they had been wind-shaped, so they had windows in them sometimes, and they had brilliant colors, the colors of the rainbow. They were very beautiful, and it was again one of those times of wonder. I don't expect to see those things again, but having seen them once is enough to fill my heart. And we arrived at the little village of Sihanouk, which is on a fjord, and some of these giant icebergs had calved, pieces had broken off, and they plunged into the water, and they were washed up into the fjords. And on the beach at Sihanouk were a number of ice forms. They were on an average of, say, 5 or 6 feet tall. And they were there in the sun, and they were melting, and they were creaking, because they were melting. And I was paid to visit the place by National Geographic. They had outfitted me with a camera and wondered what I might come back with, And so I thought to myself, these ice forms, oh, they're wonderful, and look at the creaking and cracking and groaning, and they're going to explode. And I want a picture of one as it explodes. And so I took my camera and I pointed it at one of the likely candidates. It was creaking and groaning, and I waited. And I waited. And I waited until my arms got tired of holding the camera. Well, my wife was with me, and so I gave her the camera and I said, look, you take the picture. I will try to facilitate this explosion by throwing rocks at this thing. So I backed away a few feet, I picked up some stones from the beach, and I started, like an idiot, stoning the iceberg. And as I was engaged in this madness, I heard someone shouting behind me. And I turned around, and halfway up the peneplain was an Inuit hunter coming down from his shack with a rifle in his hands, yelling at the top of his lungs, coming straight for me. And I thought, this is it. This is it. I've lived a good life. I've seen much of the world, but it is over. And he came up to me, stood about this, here on me, with his ancient rifle in his hand, and he was just yelling at the top of his lungs. And I wondered why he didn't shoot me. And then slowly, in a wonderful miracle of the oral tradition, I understood that he was asking me if I wanted him to shoot the iceberg. I cannot tell you how relieved I was. Oh, I was so relieved, and I in the best way I could, by gesturing, I said, yes, go ahead, shoot the So he backed off a few feet and pointed this ancient rifle. I thought it might explode in his face, and pulled the trigger. Hit the iceberg. It had no more effect upon it than my stones had. But the hunter, the Inuit hunter, had fulfilled his duty. He had seen these two giants come to his village. Right away they want to kill the iceberg. So it is incumbent upon him to assist us in our madness. He shoots the iceberg. Then he graciously bows to me and backs off and returns to his shack. And I've thought about that many, many times. It was a wonderful encounter. And I think that my wife and I have passed into legend.